Robert Scheer, longtime journalist, columnist, and editor at the political website Truthdig. Robert Scheer, go through the past and also talk about Glass-Steagall.
Yeah, well, the point is when Bush and McCain and Paulson, who was head of Goldman Sachs before he was head of the Treasury, say they don't know how this happened. They designed the system. We had a regulatory regime in place ever since the Great Depression to prevent this kind of meltdown, and that said that stockbrokers, insurance companies, banks, and investment banks, commercial banks could not merge. And in 1999, they passed legislation, the Graham-Leach-Bliley Act. Graham is the guy who McCain supported for president in '96. He was co-chair of his campaign until he complained about the whiners out there, meaning the public. And that legislation is what caused this. It allowed the swaps and everything else. And then in 2000, hours before the Christmas break, Graham introduced legislation. I'm holding it in my hand. The smoking gun is available on the internet. You can read it. And what it said is that the swaps is defined in the Financial Service Modernization Act, meaning that instead of going into a bank and somebody said, okay, we'll give you a loan and we expect you to pay it over 30 years. We know your house has the equity. We know you have the means to pay it. That was the traditional way. Instead, they allowed these mergers, and as a result, they could buy insurance on it. They could do these swaps. They could do what they call hybrid instruments. And in this legislation that was never discussed, was never had hearings or anything, says that all of this stuff is exempted from all previous regulation. The SEC cannot regulate it. The Commodity Futures Board cannot regulate it. So they gave these institutions, of which Goldman Sachs was critical, so was Citigroup, where Robert Rubin, who was Clinton's Treasury Secretary, he had also come from Goldman Sachs. And by the way, even though this is Republican-led, there were plenty of Democrats, in fact, a majority of Democrats, who voted for this. And Robert Rubin, who unfortunately is advising Barack Obama, I don't know how this guy can wake up and, you know, and not be embarrassed at how he can appear on television. And Lawrence Summers, these are the two guys in the Clinton administration who teamed up with Phil Gramm to pass that atrocious legislation. And now, you know, it seems to me in terms of the bailout, why don't they do what Hillary Clinton said during the primaries, just put a freeze on foreclosures? Start out with helping the homeowners and say, okay, we're not going to foreclose your house for the next year. We're going to force the banks to work out reasonable payments. We'll try to help you hold on to it. That would have stopped the bleeding here much more effectively than throwing $700 billion at these bandits.
Bob Scheer, the issue also of this rush to pass this legislation, I'm reminded somewhat of the Patriot Act after 9/11. An immense tragedy occurs, and immediately they try to rush through legislation without many of the members of Congress even having a handle as to what it really contains.
Oh, it's absolutely outrageous, and we can't let him get away with it. I mean, consider that Paulson was the head of Goldman Sachs, okay? He knew about credit swaps. He knew about hybrid instruments. He knew all of this stuff. And now he's the guy that says Congress has to give him a blank check. It has to be a pure bill. Nonsense. This is our money. Why isn't this money used to help people who are going to lose their houses? You miss 2-3 payments and they're going to foreclose on you. Then they say, well, we hope the banks will work out new agreements. Nonsense. Do a freeze on foreclosures, stop the bleeding, have a year to let it settle, and force the banks to come to agreements. You know, but I mean, the idea that they didn't know what was going on, this was a Ponzi scheme of their creation, and they thought they would bail before it hit the fan. That's what they thought. They'd be gone, and someone else would be blamed. They'd have their golden parachutes. I don't know why we're not considering criminal charges against these people. They have done more to hurt this nation than bin Laden could ever dream of.
Well, Robert Scheer, we're also joined on the telephone by Senator Bernie Sanders, the independent of Vermont, elected to the Senate in 2006 after serving 16 years in the House, longest-serving independent member of Congress in American history. Senator Sanders says the middle class shouldn't be forced to pay for a crisis created by what he calls the Bush administration's deregulatory fever and Wall Street's insatiable greed. Senator Sanders, welcome to Democracy Now! Well, the watchword these days is, or words, I should say, too big to fail.
Well, Amy, that's right. And I think if it's too big to fail, it probably is too big to exist. And by the way, among many other things, what we're doing now with the Bank of America picking up Countrywide and picking up Merrill Lynch, you're creating another institution which is too big to fail. So among many other things, in my view, that we've got to do is to start breaking up these very, very large multinational corporations who continuously put us in this position. But my main concern, I've only got a few minutes here, my main concern is twofold. I mean, for the longest period of time, up to literally a few weeks ago, we had our friends in the Bush administration telling us that the fundamentals of the economy are strong. Everything is just fine, and now they tell us we're on the verge of a major economic meltdown. We've got to give Wall Street a $700 billion bailout. And by the way, of course, it is not going to be the people who have benefited, the people at the very, very top who have benefited financially from Bush's reckless economic policies who are going to pick up the bailout. It is going to be the middle class, which has been suffering for the last 8 years. So the first point that we have to make is if a bailout is necessary, it is not going to be, if I have anything to say about it, working people picking up the cost of this. It is going to be the top 0.1% who earn more than the bottom 50%. It is going to be all of these people who have made out very, very well under Bush's reckless policies. So that's my main concern right now. Obviously, also we have to ensure that the assets purchased from the banks are realistically discounted so that we don't get ripped off in the process. And we have to require that taxpayers receive equity stakes in the bailed out companies. Also, I think that we on the left have got to be thinking big and learn a little bit from our right-wing friends who are able to pivot on a dime. For years now, they've told us that we can't afford, that government providing health care to all people is just unimaginable. It can't be done. We don't have the money to rebuild our infrastructure. We don't have the money to wipe out poverty. We can't do it all. But all of a sudden, we do have $700 billion for a bailout of Wall Street. So my view is that included in what we do, there should be a significant stimulus package, a really significant one, which addresses health care, which addresses sustainable energy, which addresses the infrastructure, which creates substantial number of jobs, addressing many of the long-term unmet needs of this country. Obviously, also, we got to understand why we got into this business. I was just rereading a speech that I gave in the House. I was on the House Banking Committee in 1999 when Glass-Steagall legislation was done away with, and the walls were broken down. And I think many of the things that I said and a number of other people said at that time about what would happen, in fact, has happened. So you got to go back to re-regulating not only financial services, but you've also got to look at energy trading as well, which is certainly one of the reasons that people are paying $3.70 for a gallon of gas today. So I think those are some of the directions that we've got to move in the next few weeks.
Senator Sanders, are you concerned that among the Democrats, and especially in Barack Obama, that many of the advisors and people helping them to shape the policies were involved in the original deregulation process itself?
Well, I think that people like Bob Rubin and people like Larry Summers come from a wing of the party, the corporate wing of the party, which has done major disservice to the people of this country. And I think Barack and I think the Democratic leadership have got to pick up economic advisors who are going to reject this nonsense of more tax breaks for billionaires, unfettered free trade, deregulation, and that whole parcel of right-wing ideology which has done us so much harm.
Senator Bernie Sanders, when you say you want this included in this bill that, well, Paulson says he wants a clean bill, what do you mean when you add health care and sustainable energy?
I mean, if we're going to be bailing out people at the top who have done this country so much harm, obviously part of the package is to understand that we have millions of kids in this country who have no health insurance, 46 million without health insurance, that we have major 6% unemployment, an infrastructure which is crumbling, that we have the opportunity now to begin the process of rebuilding America and putting people to work. So clearly, as part of a package, there should be a major effort to create good-paying jobs, meeting the unmet needs that Bush has allowed to exist for so many years.